In the Old West, love was rare, but this one was deadly. The war had ended, at least on paper. The guns were quiet, the uniforms folded away, and the flags lowered from their tall poles. But out on the wide plains, far from the cities that decided such things, the war still lived inside men who had survived it. It lived in the way they walked with stiff shoulders, in how their eyes stayed sharp even when nothing seemed wrong, and in the long silences that followed them like shadows at sundown. He came west with nothing but a tired horse, a worn coat, and memories he could not bury. The war had taken his family, his youth, and every plan he once believed in. He had marched out as a boy full of purpose and returned as a man who no longer knew where he belonged. Towns felt too loud. People asked too many questions. So he rode until the land opened up and the sky felt wide enough to breathe again. The frontier did not ask who you were before. It only asked what you could endure. He settled near a small stretch of land that most folks passed by without a second look. The soil was stubborn, the winters cruel, and the nearest town was little more than a few wooden buildings pressed together against the wind. But it was quiet. Quiet enough that the memories softened at night even if they never fully let go. Days passed in simple labor, fixing fences, chopping wood, learning the moods of the land. Some mornings, he woke before the sun, heart racing, sweat cold on his skin, hearing sounds that were no longer there. Other mornings, he woke calm and steady, almost believing that peace might be possible after all. The West had a way of doing that, giving just enough hope to keep a man moving. People in town noticed him, though they pretended not to. A stranger always drew attention, especially one who spoke little and watched much. They saw the way he carried himself, careful but strong. They noticed the scars on his hands and the way he never laughed too loud. Some said he had seen too much death. Others said he was running from something worse than death. No one asked him directly. In the Old West, some truths were understood without words. She arrived one afternoon when the dust hung heavy in the air and the sun burned low and red. The stagecoach rolled in slow, its wheels groaning like an old man's knees. He had come to town for supplies and stood near the hitching post when he saw her step down. She did not look like someone meant for this place. Her dress was worn but clean, her posture careful, as if she was bracing against more than just the wind. There was a quiet strength about her, the kind born from loss rather than comfort. Her eyes scanned the street not with fear, but with caution. She had learned, the hard way, that hope could be dangerous if held too loosely. People whispered. They always did. A woman alone on the frontier was a question without an easy answer. Some assumed she was waiting for someone who would never come. Others guessed she was running, same as many who reached the edge of the map. But when her eyes met his, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, not of faces, but of pain. They did not speak that day or the next. Their lives crossed quietly, in the way lives sometimes do before fate decides to intervene. He saw her in town, buying what little she could afford. She noticed him from a distance, the man who stood apart, who treated everyone fair but kept his heart locked away. The land tested them both. A sudden storm took down part of his fence, and she watched from afar as he worked through the night to fix it before the cattle wandered off. Another week, she struggled to carry supplies back to the small place she had claimed as her own, and without a word, he took half the load and walked beside her until the road split. No thanks were exchanged. None were needed. Slowly, the silence between them changed. It became less heavy, less guarded. In a world shaped by hardship, small kindnesses mattered more than grand gestures. The West did not reward softness, but it did remember those who showed it. He began to feel something he had sworn off long ago. Not joy, not yet, but a quiet warmth that settled in his chest when he saw her safe at the end of the day. It frightened him more than the war ever had. Love, after all, was another thing the war had stolen. Or so he believed. She carried her own ghosts. Nights found her staring out at the dark horizon, hands folded tight, remembering a life that had been torn apart before it ever had the chance to grow old. She had lost someone too, lost a future that once felt certain. The West had not healed her. It had only given her space to grieve. Their conversations came slowly, like spring after a harsh winter, a few words here, a shared look there. Stories half told and carefully ended before they reached the parts that hurt too much. They spoke of the land, the weather, the work ahead. They did not speak of the war or the people who never made it home. Yet the past has a way of finding those who try to outrun it. One evening, as the sky faded from gold to deep blue, trouble rode into town. It came in the form of men who knew how to recognize weakness, men who had survived the war not by honor, but by taking from others. Their eyes lingered too long, their questions cut too close. The fragile peace he had built began to crack. He saw the way she stiffened when she noticed them. He recognized that look. It was the same one he saw in his own reflection when danger crept too close. Whatever she had fled, it had not stayed behind. The Old West was unforgiving. It did not care about fresh starts or second chances. It only cared about who stood their ground when pushed. As the sun dipped below the hills, he felt the weight of a choice pressing down on him. He could keep his head low, protect what little he had, and let the past remain buried. Or he could step forward, risk everything again, and defend a future he had only just begun to imagine. For the first time since the war ended, his heart was no longer empty. And that made the stakes higher than ever. The night air grew tense, heavy with unspoken threats. Somewhere in the darkness, a line was about to be crossed. And when it was, nothing in this quiet corner of the West would ever be the same. The night settled in slow and heavy, pressing down on the small town like a held breath. Lamps flickered inside windows, their weak light doing little to chase away the dark corners where trouble liked to wait. He stood outside the supply store longer than necessary, watching the road with a feeling he knew too well. The war had taught him how danger felt before it showed its face. This was the same feeling, quiet but sharp. The men who rode in earlier had not left. Their horses were tied near the saloon, and their voices carried through the thin wooden walls, rough with laughter that held no warmth. They were not locals. Locals laughed softer. These men laughed like they owned the ground beneath their boots. She had gone back to her place before dusk, choosing the longer path that cut behind the hills instead of the main road. He noticed that too. People who had nothing to fear did not take the long way home. He walked his horse out of town at an easy pace, careful not to draw attention. The sky above was clear, stars sharp and cold. The land stretched wide and empty, but he knew better than to trust its calm. Out here, danger did not always come fast. Sometimes it waited. As he rode, memories surfaced without permission. Long marches. Faces he could no longer remember clearly, only the weight of knowing they were gone. The war had taught him how quickly life could change, how trust could become regret in a single moment. That was why he had stayed alone, why he had built walls thicker than any fence. Yet now those walls were cracking. He reached the turn where the road split and slowed his horse. One path led back to his land. The other curved toward the small place she had claimed. He told himself he was only passing by, that he would turn back once he saw her lantern lit, proof she was safe for the night. The lantern was not lit. A cold unease settled in his chest. He urged the horse forward, not fast enough to panic, but not slow either. The wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of smoke from town and something else beneath it. Something sharp. Her place sat quiet against the dark, a simple structure built more from need than comfort. No light showed through the windows. The door was closed, but not barred the way it usually was at night. He dismounted without a sound, tying his horse farther back among the trees. He listened. The land spoke if you knew how to hear it. Tonight it spoke of wrongness. He did not call out. He stepped closer, boots light on the dirt. Inside, the air felt cold, as if the room had been emptied too suddenly. He saw signs of a hurried exit. A chair tipped slightly, a blanket pulled half off the bed. No blood, no signs of a struggle that had turned violent. That, at least, eased his breath a little. Outside, faint tracks led away from the house, heading not toward town, but toward the hills. He cursed it under his breath, a habit he had never quite broken. Whoever had come for her had known enough not to leave a mess. That made them more dangerous than careless men. He followed the tracks until the moonlight grew thin and the land rose into uneven ground. The trail became harder to read, but he had learned patience during the war. Panic wasted energy. Calm found answers. The tracks stopped near a dry creek bed. Beyond that, nothing clear. Either she had doubled back, or someone wanted the trail to vanish here. He stood still, letting the night settle again, forcing himself to think. A sound broke the silence. Not close, but not far. A voice, low and strained, carried on the wind. He could not make out words, but he knew the tone. Fear, held back with effort. He moved. The creek bent around a cluster of rocks, and there, half hidden by shadow, he saw them. Two men, one holding her arm tight enough to leave marks by morning. The other stood close, speaking in a voice meant to sound calm but edged with threat. She stood straight despite it, chin lifted, eyes blazing even as her hands trembled. He felt something shift inside him. The war had taken much from him, but it had not taken his sense of right and wrong. These men had crossed a line they did not understand. He stepped into view, making no effort to hide himself now. The men turned, surprise flashing across their faces before hard expressions settled in. The one holding her tightened his grip. She did not cry out. Instead, her eyes met his, and in them he saw both fear and trust. Trust that he had not earned yet, but felt bound to honor. The words spoken were few, tense, measured. No one raised a weapon. Not yet. In the Old West, sometimes the most dangerous moment was the one just before everything broke loose. The men claimed she owed them, claimed she had run from something that still belonged to them. He did not believe them. Or rather, he believed they believed it, which was worse. Men who thought they were owed something did not stop easily. She spoke then, voice steady despite everything. She said she owed no one anything, that whatever past they were dragging behind them was not hers anymore. Her words were brave, but he could hear the exhaustion beneath them. Running only worked for so long. The standoff ended without violence, but not without promise. The men let her go with smiles that held no kindness, warning that debts had a way of catching up. They melted back into the darkness, confident in their own patience. He stood there long after they were gone, heart pounding, the familiar echo of danger ringing in his ears. She swayed slightly, the strength she had shown fading now that the moment had passed. He caught her before she fell, hands steady, even as his mind raced. They did not speak as he walked her back to her place. Words felt too small for what hung between them. Inside, he lit the lantern himself, setting it where its glow pushed back the shadows. She sat, hands folded tight, staring at the floor. At last she told him pieces of her story, not all. Just enough to explain the fear, the running, the men who refused to let go of a past that had already taken too much. She spoke of promises broken, of choices made under pressure, of a life that had been twisted by other people's greed. He listened. He did not interrupt. The war had taught him that sometimes listening was the only real help you could give. When she finished, silence filled the room again. Outside, the wind whispered through dry grass, carrying the distant sounds of the sleeping frontier. He knew in that quiet that things had changed. Whatever peace he had found here was no longer his alone to protect. He stood, telling her he would walk her back to town in the morning, that she should not be alone tonight. She nodded, gratitude softening her tired face. As he stepped outside to take the first watch, he felt the weight of the choice he had already made. The past had found him again, wearing a different face. And this time, walking away was no longer an option. Morning came pale and cold, the kind that made the tin cup burn your hands even with hot coffee inside. He had not slept. He sat on the porch step with his coat pulled tight, watching the yard and the empty stretch beyond it. Every sound felt louder when you were waiting for trouble. A crow's call, a twig snapping under a rabbit's foot, the wind dragging dry grass against the fence like a whisper trying to warn him. Inside, she moved softly as if any noise might bring those men back. When she finally stepped out, her eyes looked tired but steady. She held a small bundle of belongings tied in cloth, the kind of bundle people carried when they had learned not to trust a place to stay permanent. He saddled the horse without speaking much. Words were risky this early. Say the wrong thing, and the courage a person had gathered might slip away. Still, he glanced at her once, and she understood. She was not alone today. They rode toward town under a sky that looked too calm for what was brewing. The road was quiet, but his mind stayed busy, fitting pieces together. Those men had known where to find her. That meant they had been asking questions. It meant someone in town had talked, even if they did not think they were doing harm. When the buildings came into view, he slowed. A few folks were already out, sweeping steps, carrying water, feeding chickens, ordinary life. That was how the frontier worked. Even when danger showed up, people still needed bread, still needed firewood, still needed to pretend the world was not shifting under their feet. He brought her straight to the small boarding house near the edge of town. The owner was an older woman with sharp eyes and a voice that could cut through noise. She looked at them both, took in the dust on their boots and the tension in their faces, and did not ask for a long explanation. "She can have the back room," the woman said. "It's quiet. If anyone comes sniffing around, they'll be sniffing near the front." She nodded, grateful, but even gratitude came with caution now. She kept her bundle close as if it might be the only thing that belonged to her in the world. He stepped back outside and scanned the street. The saloon door swung open and shut like it was breathing. A couple of men stood near the hitching post, eyes roaming like hungry dogs. Not the same two from last night, but cut from the same cloth. He felt his jaw tighten. The war had taught him to watch patterns. Towns had patterns too. A stranger arrives, trouble follows, and soon everyone starts choosing sides without saying they are doing it. He went to the sheriff's office, a small building with a faded sign. The sheriff was not young, not old either, just worn the way the West wore people down. He sat behind a desk that had seen too many hard conversations. When he looked up, his eyes narrowed, not unfriendly, just careful. "You've been keeping to yourself," the sheriff said. "That usually means a man wants peace." "I do," he answered. His voice came out rough from lack of sleep. "But peace doesn't always want me back." The sheriff studied him a moment longer. "What happened?" He told enough to matter, and not enough to put her whole life on a table. 2 men, a claim, a threat, and a woman who didn't deserve either. He did not mention how his chest tightened when he thought of her scared in the dark. He did not mention how the idea of losing her, even now, felt like losing a chance he never knew he still wanted. The sheriff leaned back, fingers tapping once on the desk. "We don't have much law out here," he said. "We have what folks agree to. And when outsiders roll in thinking they can take what they want, that agreement gets tested, then test it," he said quietly. The sheriff's eyes sharpened again. "You know those men?" "I know their kind." The sheriff nodded as if that was answer enough. "I'll keep an eye out. But I'll tell you plain, strangers can cause trouble and then disappear. The town has to live with what's left." He understood that too well. War was the same. Men in charge made choices, and ordinary people carried the weight after. When he stepped outside, he did not go straight back to the boarding house. He walked the street slowly, as if he had nowhere to be, letting his eyes and ears work. He passed the store, the stable, the church with its small bell, the smithy where the hammer rang like a heartbeat. He watched faces. Some held sympathy, some held fear. A few held the look of people who wanted to stay out of it. At the edge of the street, near the alley behind the saloon, he heard a voice he recognized from town. A local man, the kind who smiled too much and asked too many questions, speaking low to someone he could not see. The words carried just enough to sting. "She's in town," the local man said. "Back room at the boarding house." He felt heat rise in his neck. So it was true. Someone had talked, maybe for money, maybe for favor. Maybe just because gossip was cheap entertainment in places where nothing else changed. He did not step into the alley. Not yet. If he showed anger now, he would give that local man a story to twist. He turned away and walked on, but he tucked the information into his mind like a stone in his pocket. At the boarding house, she sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, staring at the wall like it held a map out of this mess. When he entered, she looked up fast, worry flashing in her eyes. "They know," she said before he could speak. He paused. "How?" She swallowed, her throat working like the words were heavy. "A girl in the kitchen heard men talking outside. They asked the owner about me. She lied at first, but they kept pressing. Someone else must have told them anyway." He nodded. "Pack light, stay ready." Her mouth tightened. "I am tired of staying ready." That simple sentence hit harder than any shouted threat. It carried months, maybe years, of running. Nights spent listening for footsteps. Days spent pretending a smile was enough to hide fear. The frontier promised freedom, but for some, it only gave more road to flee down. He stepped closer but did not reach for her. He had learned not to touch someone's pain without permission. "I'm not asking you to run forever," he said. "I'm asking you to last through today." Her eyes softened, then hardened again like steel warmed and cooled. "Last through today," she repeated, as if testing the idea. They spoke more then, not just about danger, but about what had led them here. Not full confessions, but honest pieces. He told her about the war, not the battles, but the empty return. The way he had come home to nothing that fit him anymore. The way the West had been the only place quiet enough to breathe. She listened with a stillness that felt like respect. "So you came out here to forget," she said. "To live," he corrected. "Forgetting is a lie. You can only carry it different." She looked away, and her voice dropped. "I came out here because someone tried to make my life a bargain. Like I was a thing that could be traded." He felt his hands clench at his sides. "Those men," he said, "are they family?" "No," she said quickly. "Worse, they worked for a man back east. A man with money and pride. He wanted what he wanted, and when he couldn't get it, he decided taking was the same as earning." Her eyes lifted to his, and the fear there was not small. "They said he won't let it go. They said he thinks I embarrassed him." He understood that kind of danger too. Not the sudden kind, the slow kind. A man with pride could wait years to settle a score. Outside, the town carried on. Inside, the air thickened with the sense of a net tightening. Later, he walked to the stable and spoke to the owner, a quiet man with a limp and hands stained dark from work. The stable owner had seen plenty in his time. He listened without interrupting. "You're thinking of leaving," the stable owner said finally. "I'm thinking of keeping her alive," he answered. The stable owner nodded once. "Town's got eyes. But eyes don't always come with courage." He leaned in slightly, voice lower. "The men you're worried about aren't just two. There's more in the hills. They rode in separate so it wouldn't look like a gang. I saw 3 unfamiliar horses watered last night behind the saloon." His stomach tightened. That matched the pattern. "Spread out, blend in, wait for the right moment." "What about the sheriff?" he asked. The stable owner gave a tired smile. "Sheriff tries. But trying and winning aren't the same." On his way back, he passed the church. The door stood open and he heard soft singing from inside. A few women and children, practicing for Sunday, their voices thin but hopeful. It reminded him of things the war tried to kill but never fully managed. Faith, routine, the stubborn belief that tomorrow might still be worth living. He stood there longer than he meant to. Then he turned away because hope could be dangerous too. Hope could make a man careless. Across the street, a figure watched him from the saloon window, not hiding, not bold either, just watching. When he met the gaze, the figure stepped back into shadow. That night, the sheriff called him back to the office. The lantern on the desk cast hard lines across the sheriff's face. "I heard talk," the sheriff said. "A local fellow's been running his mouth, telling outsiders where she is." He kept his voice steady. "I know," the sheriff's eyes flicked up. "You do something about it and it becomes your fight, not the town's." "It already is," he said, and surprised himself with how true it felt. He had tried to build a quiet life alone, but the moment he saw her standing brave in the dark, something inside him had chosen. The sheriff sighed. "There's another thing." A letter came in on the stage today. Not addressed to you, not addressed to her, addressed to the boarding house owner. He frowned. "What did it say?" The sheriff slid the letter across the desk. It was short. The words were polite on the surface, like a man smiling while sharpening a knife. It said someone would arrive soon to retrieve property that had wandered off. It offered money for cooperation. It promised consequences for interference. Property. His throat went tight. He looked at the sheriff. "Did the owner show you this?" The sheriff nodded. "She did. She's scared. Not for herself, for the town." He folded the letter carefully. "When are they coming?" The sheriff shook his head. "No date. That's the point. Keeps everyone nervous. Makes folks ready to give in." He stood from the chair and felt the room spin just slightly from the weight of it all. "Then we make our own plan," he said. The sheriff's gaze held him. "And what's your plan?" He thought of her in that back room, staring at a wall like it might save her. He thought of the men in the hills, waiting. He thought of the local man selling secrets for coin. He thought of the war, how men had died because nobody planned for the enemy to be patient. "My plan," he said slowly, "is to stop being surprised." As he stepped out into the night, he saw a shadow move near the boarding house fence. Just a shift of darkness against darkness. Then it was gone. He did not chase it. He only watched, heart steady, mind sharp, because now he knew what they were doing. They were not coming with noise. They were coming with time. And time, on the frontier, could be the most dangerous weapon of all. The days that followed felt stretched tight like a rope pulled to its limit. Nothing happened, and that was what made it worse. Men passed through town, some familiar, some not. Horses came and went. Every sound after dark carried meaning, whether it deserved it or not. She stayed mostly inside the boarding house, helping in the kitchen when she could, keeping her head down. But fear has a way of leaking out through small cracks. He saw it in how she jumped at sudden noise, how she checked the window before sitting, how she slept in short pieces instead of deep rest. Each night, he took a position outside, never too close to draw attention, never too far to be useless, the town noticed. People always did. Some avoided him now, crossing the street when they saw him coming. Others nodded with quiet respect, as if they understood that trouble had found him whether he wanted it or not. A few offered small help without saying why. Extra food left where he would find it. A word passed low about strangers seen on the ridge at dawn. The Old West was built on unspoken agreements. One afternoon he rode out to check his land, needing space to think. The fences still stood, the cattle grazed calm, unaware of how fragile peace could be. He dismounted near the old cottonwood tree and leaned against it, letting the sun warm his face. The war came back to him then, not in images of battle, but in the waiting, the long hours before something happened. The knowledge that when it did, there would be no room for doubt or hesitation. You either stood or you were carried. He realized he had been running from that truth since he came west, building a life that asked nothing of him beyond survival. But the moment she stepped into that dark creek bed, scared and defiant, he had crossed back into a world where choices mattered again. That night the sheriff came to him quietly, no badge showing, no authority in his voice. Just a man talking to another man. "They're testing the town," the sheriff said. "Sending one or two at a time, buying drinks, asking questions they already know the answers to." He nodded. "They're seeing who talks. And who stands," the sheriff added. They stood in silence a moment, listening to the wind. Finally, the sheriff spoke again. "Some folks are scared. They think if they hand her over, it all goes away." "And you?" The sheriff met his eyes. "I think that kind of peace costs too much." The next morning, she surprised him by stepping outside on her own. She walked to the church, head high, and sat through the quiet service even though it was not Sunday. A few women sat with her, their presence saying more than words could. When she came out, her shoulders looked straighter. "I am done hiding," she said to him softly as they walked back. "I won't make it easy for them." Fear tightened his chest. Courage did too. "That makes you a target." She looked at him then, really looked. "So are you?" They spoke more openly now, not just about danger, but about what came after. Not plans, not promises, just ideas spoken carefully. He told her about the small house he wanted to fix up proper one day, maybe plant something besides grass. She spoke about wanting to stay somewhere long enough to stop listening for footsteps at night. These talks were dangerous in their own way. Hope could make loss sharper, but neither of them pulled back. The tension broke one evening as the sun dropped low and red. A rider came hard into town, dust flying, fear playing on his face. He dismounted near the saloon and shouted for the sheriff. "They're coming," the rider said. 4 of them, armed, riding and slow like they owned the place. The town froze. Doors closed, windows darkened, mothers pulled children inside. Men stood uncertain, hands hovering near belts. He found her at the boarding house. She was calm, too calm, like someone who had already accepted what might come. "They're close," he said. She nodded. "I know." He wanted to tell her to run, to take a horse and ride until the land swallowed her. But he saw in her eyes that she would not. Running had taken everything it could from her. Instead, he said, "Stay near people. Stay visible." She reached out then, fingers brushing his sleeve, light but steady. "Be careful," she said. The words settled deep. The riders entered town just before dark, hooves slow, heads high. They did not rush, they did not shout. Confidence like that was meant to intimidate. 4 men, well-dressed, weapons visible but not raised. The leader dismounted first, his smile smooth and practiced. He watched from across the street, body loose, mind sharp. The leader's eyes moved over the town, weighing it, dismissing it. Then they landed on the boarding house. The leader spoke loud enough for all to hear. "We are here to collect what belongs to us." No one answered. The sheriff stepped forward. "Nothing here belongs to you," he said. The leader smiled wider. "That is not how my employer sees it." The words employer landed heavy. This was not just personal. This was power reaching out across distance, using money and fear as its hands. The leader continued, voice calm. "We will take the woman and be gone. No one else needs to be hurt. Interference would be unfortunate." A murmur moved through the crowd. Fear, sharp and quick. He stepped forward then, feeling every eye turn. "She is not property," he said. His voice was even, but it carried. The leader's gaze settled on him like a weight. "You are?" "Someone who won't move." For a moment it felt like the world held still. The leader studied him, seeing the scars in the way he stood, the quiet readiness. Something flickered in his eyes, not fear, but calculation. "You fought in the war," the leader said. "Yes, then you know how this ends." "Men with money do not lose?" He shook his head. "Men who believe that make mistakes." The leader laughed softly. Brave words. Behind him, townsfolk shifted. A blacksmith stepped closer. The stable owner stood firm. A farmer moved to block the alley behind the boarding house. Small actions, but they added up. The leader noticed. His smile thinned. "This town chooses a woman over its own safety?" The sheriff spoke. "This town chooses itself." The standoff stretched. Hands hovered. Breath came shallow. She stepped out then, onto the porch, visible to all. The crowd sucked in a breath. She stood tall, fear in her eyes, but not control. "I choose myself," she said. The leader's face hardened. "That is not your choice to make." He moved without thinking, placing himself between her and the riders. "It is now." The air felt ready to break. Somewhere a horse stamped. A child cried and was hushed. The leader raised a hand slowly, not a weapon. A signal. From the edge of town, movement. More men, not just 4. Shadows separating into figures. His heart sank. This was the patience the stable owner warned him about. The waiting, but something else moved too. Men from town stepped forward, one by one. Not armed like soldiers, not trained for war, but rooted to the ground they lived on. They did not shout, they did not threaten, they stood. The leader's confidence wavered, just a crack. He had not expected resistance to look like this. Quiet, collective. "You will regret this," the leader said. "Maybe," the sheriff replied. "But we will regret letting you take her more." The leader's eyes flicked to the surrounding faces, counting, recalculating. Power worked best when people believed in it. Tonight, belief was slipping. He felt her hand grip his arm behind him, not clinging, anchoring. The leader lowered his hand. "This is not over," he said. "You have made an enemy." He met the man's gaze. "We already had one." The riders mounted, slow and deliberate, retreating the way they had come, promising return without saying it. The town did not cheer. Relief came quiet, shaky. People exhaled, doors opened a little, life crept back. She stood behind him, breathing hard. He turned, and for a moment everything else faded. The danger was not gone. The future was not safe. But she was still here. As the riders disappeared into the dark, he knew this was only the beginning of the hardest part. The waiting was over. Now came the reckoning. And when it came, it would decide not just who survived, but who finally got to live. The town did not sleep much that night. Lamps stayed lit longer than usual, and voices murmured behind closed doors. Fear had loosened its grip, but it had not vanished. People understood now that standing together had consequences, both good and dangerous. Still, There was a quiet pride moving through the streets, the kind that comes when ordinary folks realize they are stronger than they believed. He walked her back inside the boarding house and stayed near the door until her breathing slowed and her shoulders eased. Only then did he step away, taking his place outside again, eyes on the dark. The riders were gone, but he knew better than to believe the trouble was finished. Men who lost control rarely accepted it easily. Morning arrived soft and golden, as if the land itself wanted peace. Sunlight spilled across the street, and the town began to move again. Children ran with cautious laughter. A wagon creaked past. Life pushed forward, stubborn and determined. The sheriff called a meeting before noon. Not in the office, but out in the open, where everyone could hear. He spoke plain and steady, explaining what had happened and what might still come. He did not promise safety, he promised honesty. "We stood once," the sheriff said. "That matters. But standing once is not the same as being ready again." Heads nodded. No one argued. The boarding house owner stepped forward next. She said the woman would stay as long as she wished, that no outsider would decide who belonged in their town. Others followed. The stable owner, the blacksmith? Even a few who had stayed silent before now spoke up, shame and resolve mixing in their voices. He watched her as she listened. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. Instead, she stood taller, like someone finally allowed to breathe. That afternoon, a messenger arrived with news that shifted everything. The riders had been seen heading east, not regrouping, not circling back. Word traveled fast on the frontier, and it seemed the employer behind them had decided the cost was no longer worth the reward. A small town united was more trouble than a single woman on the run. It did not mean danger would never return, but it meant the immediate threat had passed. Relief washed through the town slowly, carefully, like people were afraid to trust it. He felt it too, though his guard did not drop all at once. The war had taught him that peace needed tending, like a fire that could die if ignored. Days passed. Then weeks. She began to move freely again, helping at the boarding house, walking through town without watching every shadow. Laughter came easier now, surprising her both times it happened. Once, while carrying laundry, she laughed outright at something small and silly and then covered her mouth, stunned by herself. He saw it from across the street and felt something warm settle in his chest. They spent time together without needing an excuse. Simple things, sharing meals, talking as the sun went down, walking the land near his place, where the grass waved like a promise. They spoke of the past without letting it control them. He told her about friends he lost in the war, not with bitterness, but with respect. She spoke of the life she had hoped for once, then admitted she was starting to imagine a different one. One evening she stood beside him near the old cottonwood tree. The sky burned orange and purple, wide and endless. "I thought love was something the war took from you forever," she said quietly. He considered that. "I thought the same." She looked at him then, eyes steady. "What do you think now?" He did not rush the answer. He had learned the value of truth spoken slowly. "I think love waits," he said. "Sometimes it waits until you are strong enough to carry it again." Her hand slipped into his, not sudden, not shy, just right. The town changed too. Not in big ways, but in the small ones that mattered. People watched out for each other more. Doors stayed open longer. Conversations lingered. The fear that had once kept them apart now reminded them why unity mattered. The Old West was harsh, but it did not have to be lonely. One afternoon, the sheriff rode out to his land, dismounted, and leaned against the fence. "You planning to stay?" the sheriff asked. He smiled faintly. "Looks that way." The sheriff nodded. "Town could use men who stay." After he left, she joined him by the fence. "That was an offer," she said. "It was," he agreed. "And?" she asked. He turned to her fully. "I already accepted." "A while ago," she laughed then, free and clear, the sound carrying across the field. It felt like a victory greater than any won with force. As summer faded into fall, the land softened. They worked together on the small house, fixing boards, planting a modest garden. It was not grand, but it was theirs. Each nail driven felt like a statement. "We are here. We are staying." At night, they sat on the porch and watched the stars come out. Sometimes they talked, Sometimes they did not need to. Silence no longer felt heavy. It felt earned. The past did not disappear. He still woke some nights, heart racing, memories pressing close. She still flinched at raised voices. But now, when those moments came, they were not faced alone. A hand on an arm, a quiet word. The simple reminder that survival did not have to be solitary. One evening, months after the writers left, a letter arrived. No threat, no demand. Just a short note stating that any claim over her was withdrawn, final, and complete. The paper shook slightly in her hands as she read it, then stilled. "It's done," she whispered. He pulled her close, feeling the truth of it settle between them. The running was over. The town gathered that weekend not for a meeting, not for fear, but for celebration. Food was shared. Music played rough and joyful. Stories were told and retold, growing kinder with each telling. Children danced. Adults smiled like they had remembered how. As the fire burned low and the night cooled, he stood with her at his side and looked out at the people who had become something like family. The war had taken everything once. The frontier had taken plenty too. But here, in this quiet corner of the Wild West, something had been given back. Love had found him after the war took everything. Not the fragile kind that breaks at the first storm, but the steady kind. The kind that survives loss, faces fear, and chooses to stay. She leaned into him, and he knew, with a certainty deeper than anything the war had taught him, that the future was no longer something to endure. It was something to build. And in a land known for hardship and heartbreak, that felt like the greatest victory of all. Subscribe for more forgotten love stories of the Wild West.